Welcome to Dalma Makes. In this video, I'll share how I made this cross-stitched piece of hat mouse from Stardew Valley into a finished, displayable piece. Hat Mouse is an adorable little side character in the game Stardew Valley, and he sells hats and has a very interesting, cute speech pattern. Because this game is made with pixel art, it perfectly lends itself to cross stitch. I've made several cross stitch Stardew projects in the past. I'll make sure to leave links in the description. I took a screenshot of the hat mouse's house in summer, and I copied pixel by pixel everything in cross stitch medium. It was a bit late in the project when I realized I did not, in fact, have enough space on the piece of canvas that I was using to stitch the whole house. But instead of despairing, I decided to have a change of plan and turn it into a mixed media project. I'm only including a little bit of the stitching footage on the very last little leaf. I have tried to film stitching in the past. For my current setup, it's very difficult and it also takes a very long time. And I do not like to sit at a desk and do my stitching. I usually do it while I'm comfy watching TV or something. But here it is. I did in fact make this with my own hands. Now to actually turn it into a display piece, I used a canvas board that I painted over several times. They are failed projects, and because of the many layers of paint, it was not usable as a canvas anymore. So instead I repurposed it as the base for this. I painted it in a very light greenish blue background. I used some recycled cardstock from like postage packaging, those sturdy envelopes. And I cut out some strips to illustrate wooden boards to finish the upper portion of Hat Mouse's house. I figured adding a little bit of height to the top would help with having those boards slightly overhang the edge of the actual cross stitch. I just cut out a piece from foam board as a support. One by one, I glued my wooden board paper strips to this base and cut off the excess. And then I realized I needed more support for the actual roof part. So I added back in a portion of the foam core pieces I cut off. At this point, it was safe to actually attach my cross-stitched piece to the canvas. And I did this with a generous amount of PVA glue. And I did the same for the foam board piece with the wood slats attached. As a foundation, I added more of the paper strips for the roof part as well, but I already knew I wanted a different texture for the roof. I was thinking about those rounded roof tiles, and I thought I could make them out of paper straws. I already had the paper straws in my stash, so I just cut them in half and I cut out pieces of random lengths. Basically, just glued them on in the best way I could to sort of allude to those roof tiles. and cover that area in a new textured material. Cutting the paper straws in half is actually a lot more difficult than it sounds, at least definitely to do it precisely. I wanted to add an attic window, and for the frame of that I used some matches. I tried to cut off the phosphorus part with a sharp knife, but then I thought better of it. I should actually take some measurements and see how long I need those matchsticks to be. I measured and cut out another piece of cardstock from the same packaging material because I wanted the inside of the window to not have the wood slats. And then I trimmed my matchsticks to size with some flush cutters instead because it was faster. Then I assembled and attached the whole thing with PVA glue once again. I definitely wanted everything to have a lot more texture than the plain paper or the shiny paper straws. So I used a texture paste with a fine sandy grit to it. I used a small brush to get into tight corners and my fingers on the larger portions, as well as a pokey tool to help bring back the division between the wooden slats as well as some of the wood grain detailing. I ended up adding the texture paste to the roof as well, and I also used it to sort of fill in some unsightly gaps. In a few hours this was dry, and it's a very good material to receive paint. So I just started painting. The base coat for the wooden boards was a dark brown. I needed that good, reliable coverage, and I will lighten them a lot with other paints later. I also added this dark brown paint in the grooves between the tiles to make sure that those will be the darkest, most shadowy areas. And then I went in with a deep red on the other parts of the tile surfaces. When that base coat was dry, I went in with a few different light browns. I applied this with my finger, and these colors I'm using are quite chalky, and they really picked up the wood grain texture. I added a much brighter orangey red to the roof tiles themselves. I even used a straight up orange sparingly on the higher points. With the house structure done, I wanted to create some ground for it. My choice of material are these synthetic moss balls that are made for aquariums, I believe. There's styrofoam inside, and there is this really sturdy flocking on the outside. I think it's a wonderful material, and I've used it several times before in my projects. I just slice them into manageable pieces and using them as little earth mounds covered in grass at the base of the house. In Stardew Valley, in the summer, there is this special event when green rain comes down and the entire valley is flooded by verdant life. All of the trees are covered in moss, new bushes and greenery grows everywhere, and special trees sprout overnight. I think this is visually really beautiful, and it inspired me to try to capture Headmouse's house on this green rainy day. To illustrate that on my project, I'm going to use a large amount of plastic plants, but I'm going to start out with some silk leaves just to cover those unsightly edges from the raw canvas that was left over from the original stitched piece. After this, I went through my entire stash of plastic plants and cut off little bits of them into more manageable pieces and ones that would fit at this scale. Because these are indeed plastic, I used hot glue to attach them. All of the plastic plants I have were donated by someone who was clearing out their garage, and I do not even know why they had just bags and bags of plastic plants. But the moment I saw them, I immediately knew that I was going to be able to use them in a lot of my miniature projects, and they have come in handy in many other things. I know not everyone has these sort of things already on hand, but I believe if anybody wanted, they could replicate it with paper plants or by drawing and coloring leaves and cutting them out. For me, I went quite crazy making this as lush and as full and overgrown as I felt like it. When the green rain comes, everything gets covered in greenery. Or maybe that is my excuse to cover all the little unsightly edges and seams from my technically unfinished cross-stitch piece. I took some creative liberty and added a larger creeping vine on the upper part of Headmouse's house. I know that's not in the game, but I think it works well to break up the brown a little bit. I also had this very interesting material that looks like textured yarn almost. It's quite stretchy and it's like curly when bunched up. So I just cut off and bunched up pieces of it and hot glued them all over the place, especially in covering the edges of the canvas and hiding the white styrofoam from those ground pieces. I was loving how dimensional and touchable this was coming out, so I wanted to do more and more, and I decided to add these tiny pine cones, which are actually the female catkins of an alder tree that are dried out in the winter. But they do sure look like pine cones at this scale. And I even added one to the very top of the rooftop. Maybe a squirrel hid it there. I was happy with how this was going, but I can never stop adding details, so I turned to my grass tufts for a finishing touch, and I picked out some of the more dried grass looking tufts to break up the green in some places. And I also used them strategically to hide any remaining small unsightly gaps. These teeny tiny ones are just so perfect for the roof. They look like little mounds of moss. I've definitely seen them like that in real life. And with that finishing touch, my project is done. And little Hat Mouse has a lovely cozy home in a very green, flourishing environment. I know for a fact that if I didn't pivot towards mixed media, this cross stitch piece would have never been finished. And what a shame would that have been after I put in so many hours of labor already into it. This way I have a piece I can display on my wall and delight in for a very long time. If you do cross stitch, how do you display your finished pieces? I would be really curious to hear about it in the comments. And I would love to hear any comments you have. I always love to read them. And I promise I'll try my best to answer them all. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to my channel. I upload a new crafty video every week. Thank you for watching. I hope you're having a nice day. Bye.